Our next speaker tonight is Sternberg. Sternberg is a Cornell and Northwestern Kellogg alum with a passion for healthcare innovation. As a co-founder of Robert Wood Johnson Biomedical Entrepreneurship Network, known as BEN, and the Distinction in Medical Innovation and Entrepreneurship, known as DIMI, Stephen believes in the power of connecting students, faculty, and industry partners to help bring novel solutions to unmet patient needs. And as a former co-president of AMSA and co-chair of the MedTalks Operating Committee, he is thrilled to be on the other side of the process as a speaker. When he has the chance, Stephen loves to travel 33 countries and counting to spend time outdoors hiking and skiing and to try to recreate tasty food videos. Please welcome Stephen.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
Whew, that was intense. We're not serving any coffee, so they told me I had to include something with shock value. So good evening. What you just watched was one of my favorite scenes from the movie Network, in which the news anchor is frustrated with how easily society is distracted, and he tries to motivate them towards some kind of action. While entertaining, it's also a timeless social commentary. 40 years later, and we're still just as frustrated about the status quo, and the most vocal groups among us exert enormous political influence. These emotions are powerful. And in medicine in particular, there's no shortage of issues to be angry about. Whether you're worried about the ballooning cost of medical education, with the average graduating physician having $200,000 in debt, or maybe you're concerned about the poor outcomes that the most vulnerable patients experience as a consequence of inefficient and unaffordable care, or maybe you're concerned about the epidemic of burnout, with increasing numbers of physicians unable to deal with the daily stresses of their lives and many succumbing to suicide. The list goes on and on. We can and should be angry. But we must also remain hopeful, because healthcare has experienced incredible progress over the years, and that progress is a result of persistent and incremental change. So what I'd like to do this evening is I'd like to discuss how we can acknowledge our anger and use it to drive meaningful change. And to do so, I will highlight the perspective of individuals from 3 stages of training: student, resident, and attending. For each, I will highlight an aspect of the broken system that led to significant frustration, what the responses were to that frustration, and what could have been done differently. And I will use these stories to argue the need for a personal and a collective culture of change, one that celebrates reflection, experimentation, and ultimately action. So, students, are you angry? The nice thing with starting with you guys is that the answer is not really. And I miss those days. But make no mistake, academic medicine, like any system, has bloat, and you will pay for that bloat with your time and money. Now, setting aside that we're in a tuition bubble in general, and grad school costs are rising across the board, what really grinds my gears is the endless amount of minor but necessary expenses that accrue along the way. One such expense came to my attention in my second year in the spring of 2016, when a group of Harvard fourth years started a petition to end Step 2 CS. Now, as a brief primer, Step 2 CS is one of the main board exams that we have to complete in order to gain entry into residency and ultimately earn our medical license. Developed in the early 2000s, it's fairly new, carries a $1,300 registration fee, is administered in only 5 cities in the country, and infrequently at that. All in, CS represents a pretty significant burden for fourth years who are doing critical rotations and interviewing for residency. Now, the utility of the exam has been debated since its inception. And I want to be clear, there are passionate arguments on both sides. Those who argue against the exam will tell you that a 2015 JAMA policy paper found that due to the high pass rate at the time, it was 98%, it cost the NBME $1.1 million to identify a single student as not being competent to enter residency. Think about whether you'd order a test with that cost-effectiveness profile. Now, those who support the test will tell you that the value goes far beyond the pass-fail rate, and that the skills tested have changed curricula throughout the country. Better students mean that ultimately patients have better outcomes when those students become residents. And the NBME made the test harder, and the pass rate fell by 5%. Now, without judging whether the petition was worthwhile, I want to acknowledge an incredible feat. These Harvard fourth years were able to accrue in 1 month 13,000 signatures, which is 1/6 of the total US med student population. But then it plateaued. Despite massive coverage and early traction, the test was not abolished. And those of us who signed the petition, we were naturally upset. But what really made me angry was how little attention this issue garnered among my peers. The majority of individuals I spoke with were unaware of the pro and con arguments, and many hadn't bothered to open the petition at all. Was it due to a lack of awareness? Well, at the time, the petition had national media coverage. It was promoted on our school listserv, so I'm pretty sure everyone heard about it. Was it due to low incentives? Well, it seems spending 15 minutes to potentially save thousands of dollars is a pretty strong incentive. No, I would argue that the problem was much deeper, and it reflects the complacency that students develop to the often unfair systems around them. So what could have been done differently? Well, specifically, we could have, those of us who were very passionate about the petition could have emailed our peers and asked them to sign it. The student government could have partnered with the administration. We could have had a mandatory info session and sparked a debate. Or we could have gamified the process and given extra rewards for signing. But more broadly, each of us could have been primed to listen and to care. Perhaps Step 2 CS is not your cause. That's fine. But as clinicians in training, you will face a lifetime of licensing exams, continuing medical education costs, organizational training programs, etc. And it's important that at an early stage, you remain critical and outspoken when assessing the value of the activities that you participate in. So students, get mad and stay curious. You get to shape the future of this profession. Residents, are you angry? I'd like to pivot now to resident self-confidence and patient well-being. I recently completed a rotation at a busy medical ICU with approximately 30 rooms. Every week, we had a new attending with his or her own unique preferences, workflow, and teaching style. Practice variation is common. It underlies the art of medicine. But in a place as dynamic as the ICU, with patients as sick as they are, and therefore as long as they are, the art bears risks. In the ICU, you prioritize the sickest patients first. This is universal, and it makes sense. But after you've stabilized the most acute patients, you then round on the remainder of the floor as a team. And that part is idiosyncratic. Now, I believe that humans naturally default to simple patterns, especially when we're overwhelmed. So it was no surprise to me in those first 2 weeks that both of my attendings decided to round on the patients in ascending numerical order, room 1 to room 30. I didn't think much of it until the third week when our attending proposed a simple yet radical idea. We would alternate our rounds daily so that it'd be fairer to the patients. Now, I respected the attending for practicing his own art, but I didn't really know what the value was going to be of this change. On the fourth day of the week with him, we were taking care of a patient with a rare vascular disease that had landed the patient in the ICU for over a month. As we were moving on from his room to the next, his wife came out in the hallway with tears in her eyes, and she stopped us to thank us. I had assumed that she was thanking us for our diligent care, or maybe how clearly we communicated his prognosis. But she shared with us how grateful she was at being seen early that morning. Every day, she would visit her husband, and she would wait upwards of 8 hours watching us round on the floor until we would come to see her. Overwhelmed with the ICU, she was never able to advocate for herself, and that morning she felt like she and her husband really mattered. Her gratitude was profound, and it left an impression on the team, but that was short-lived, because the next week, we had a new attending, and half the residents were changed. And again, Our rounding tempo adjusted to the new style, and we resumed the ascending 1 to 30 approach. Several days later, the attending overheard us discussing the alternation method, and after a very brief explanation, he was completely sold. While I'm grateful for his open-mindedness, I have to wonder how many patients felt neglected in those first few days? Or worse, how many patients waited for the attending to sign off on an extubation procedure, had that process pushed to the next day, and had their discharge delayed? Now, medical science is only one part of medical practice. Transition of care is usually delicate, and any number of obstacles can lead to increased length of stay or worse outcomes. Why didn't we bring this up on the first day of our rotation, or of that week? Well, as many of you can concede, speaking up to your superiors is quite intimidating. And in medicine, there's a culture of subordination that makes it particularly difficult for residents to speak up to attendings. If you did a scholarly search of formalized feedback programs, the data is almost exclusively unidirectional from attending to resident. The few studies that do look at formalized upward feedback models found that patient care was improved, and so was team morale. So it's not enough to say that we should seek out and emulate best practices. Rather, they should be formally and frequently communicated to the whole care team so that all of us can learn from it. And the way to foster that communication is to have a culture that promotes that bidirectional feedback. So residents, stay angry and have the courage to say why. Attendings, are you angry? All the time. Actually, we have 2 of the happiest attendings here, so that's excellent. 3. Now, that is kind of a silly question, actually, because 50% of nationally surveyed doctors admit to feeling burnout. The rate of job dissatisfaction is so high that 30% of primary care doctors over the age of 50 plan on retiring in the next few years. Worse still is the high prevalence of depression and the increasing rate of suicide among physicians who have completed their training. If depression is anger turned inwards, we are truly at a crisis. How did this happen? Well, there's complex and powerful themes at play: loss of autonomy, the burden of the EHR and administrative overhead, uncertainty about the future. But as the patient-doctor relationship and that intimacy continues to erode, the gratification of caring for another can no longer make up for the feeling of being a cog in an increasingly complex wheel. So for you seasoned clinicians, I want to discuss how activism can inject a little life into your careers. Now, activism doesn't just happen in the political sphere. It happens locally, in your communities and in your health system. A decade ago, the story of Atul Gawande dazzled us when a young, innovative surgeon revolutionized preoperative protocols and likely saved countless lives. But to me, the revolution was in demonstrating to non-academics that physicians can change their behaviors, and that they will do so when evidence-based medicine is passionately advocated to them. Dr. Gawande's change effort took many years and many physician champions along the way, but he demonstrated that process and technology-driven improvements are possible in care delivery. And today in healthcare, we're seeing an unprecedented rate of change. More than ever, hospital mergers and providers are taking risk. And with that risk comes the need for process improvement. Health systems are desperate to seem innovative in addressing the cost, access, and quality of care. And this creates many opportunities for physicians at all stages of training to introduce new initiatives to their organization. Whether it's propping up a new virtual healthcare center, piloting a new population health model, starting a new innovation curriculum, this truly is the golden age of experimentation. But perhaps you're not an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur. Maybe that's not your cup of tea. Then attendings, how have you advocated for yourselves? How have you experimented in your careers? For example, many family medicine doctors are following their colleagues to new models of direct primary care, a system that allows family medicine doctors to decrease the number of hours that they work and improve their job satisfaction. Others are turning to telehealth as a way to introduce flexibility in their schedule, and still others are looking to nonprofits and startups to revitalize their passions. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but the important aspect is that you explore the opportunities around you, that you find those models of work-life balance or career satisfaction that you envy. Attendings, own your anger, and actively experiment to unburden yourselves. Now, while I alluded to these throughout the talk, I'd like to reinforce a 3-step way to build that culture of change, and then I'd like to discuss why we should broaden that to the greater organizations. First, acknowledge your anger. Not every trigger is worthy of deep introspection, and only by understanding what frustrates us can we begin to prioritize the causes that are worth pursuing. Second, experiment. Take that first step. You can't always see the end of the journey when you begin it, but the process is cathartic, and you will learn a tremendous amount about yourselves. Your communication will improve, your leadership skills will as well, and you'll build strong professional and personal networks. And third, celebrate your actions. Whether you've chalked up a small win or found yourself unable to change the status quo, you've already made a difference. And if it didn't work out this time, it will the next. Now, as clinicians, we follow a formulaic career path. So when we encounter a situation that makes us angry, we sweep it under the rug in favor of more immediate concerns. Getting that board score, that residency spot, or as an attending, just staying above water. This talk is not a prescription for an absolute set of actions. It's a framework for which you should approach your obstacles that you will no doubt encounter in your career. At the beginning of the talk, I stressed the importance of culture, because I believe that culture transcends individuals or one-off encounters. It creates a shared set of ideals that we can all strive towards. If your health executives support experimentation, if your residency directors promote bi-directional feedback, if your deans encourage activism, that creates an environment where patients and clinicians can thrive. My hope is that you don't ever lose the spark that brought you to medicine in the first place, and that when someone tries to snuff that spark out, that you get mad. Because if you work hard at it, you can turn that anger into meaningful action. Thank you.